Good evening, I'm Laura Lee.
And I'm Dan Wolf. Thanks for joining us. A man previously sentenced to life in prison for the murder of a UMD student suddenly faces a much shorter sentence nearly a decade after that killing.
Back in 2017, 22-year-old UMD student William Grayhack was shot and killed during what authorities say was a botched robbery attempt at his Duluth home. Noah King, who was 18 at the time, was one of the three men who entered Grayhack's home. He carried a wrench while the other two men carried guns. King was eventually convicted of 2 felony murder charges in 2018, but had one of those voided just last month.
Now, this is all because of a new law that Northern News Now's Sophia Lauber is breaking down for us tonight. Sophia?
Dan, Laura, this is a result of recent Minnesota legislation that changed who can be held responsible for felony murder when multiple people are involved in the crime. Proponents say the new legislation is more just, but the retroactive application of the law, which is what allowed King to be resentenced, has sparked controversy. Previously, under Minnesota law, all accomplices in a felony murder could be held equally responsible.
There was no distinction between the criminal responsibilities of those relative players necessarily by the aiding and abetting statute that applied.
In the case of William Grayhack's murder, that meant all 3 men who entered the house the night he was killed could be charged with first-degree felony murder, even if they didn't fire the gun. But in 2023, that was overhauled by the Felony Murder Reform Act. Proponents of the act call the state's previous laws unjust, saying they allowed people who did not kill or even intend to kill to be sentenced as murderers. Going forward, if someone is charged with felony murder, prosecutors must prove they acted with intent. But the act also opened a window for previous offenders to apply for resentencing.
That's pretty unusual. You don't see that very often.
In May, Noah King's first-degree murder charge and his life in prison sentence were voided. His defense arguing he did not intend to aid in a murder when he entered Grayhack's home with a wrench. He'll now serve 32.5 years with the possibility of supervised release at roughly 22. In a statement on the resentencing, St. Louis County Attorney's Office wrote, "It reopens wounds for murder victims' families."
Because it is so unusual to have a retroactive resentencing based on a change in state law, I suspect that that's not something that victims' family members were prepared for at the time the cases were concluded.
DeAndre Davenport, one of the other 2 men who entered Grayhack's home, also petitioned for resentencing. He has a hearing scheduled for next week. Live in studio, Sophia Lauber, Northern News Now.